Christmas mystery, the 12th of December. For there's no sense in believing what's right unless it leads to helping people in distress. When Papa came home from work on the 11th of December, Mama and Joachim were waiting for him. "Have you found out what she's called?" asked Joachim. "Let me in first," complained Papa. "Yes, she was called Elizabeth. Elizabeth Hansen, in fact. It happened in December 1948. Dinner was ready, so they sat down at the table. "I went into the bookshop as well," continued Papa. "I went into the storeroom with him, and there he found a photo that the flower seller had once put in his window in exchange for a glass of water. I have it in my briefcase." "Then fetch it," said Mama. So he did. He put the picture on the table. Joachim snatched it and Mama leaned over it. It showed a young woman with long fair hair. Round her neck she was wearing a silver cross set with a red stone. She was leaning against a small car. At the top of the photo was a large dome. At the bottom was written Elizabeth. "No last name," said Papa. "It's not exactly an unusual name, but it's written in Norwegian. In many countries, Elizabeth is spelt differently." "Do you think she's not Norwegian then?" asked Mama. "No idea," said Papa, "but look at the photo carefully. The dome in the background is St. Peter's in Rome. She's standing in the road that leads to St. Peter's Square. The car dates from the end of the 50s. "I feel almost scared," whispered Mama. "What are we getting mixed up with?" "Yes, it's a mystery, but there's no reason to believe that the girl who disappeared in 1948 is the same as the woman in the photograph," said Papa. He sat staring in front of him. "He wasn't at the market," he said. "Who?" "You're talking in riddles," said Mama. "The flower seller, John, the man with the water. I'd give a lot to talk with him, for there is one thing we can take for granted. It was he who made this strange calendar, and now he's disappeared." That was all he said. Joachim was thinking about all of this so much that he wanted to go to bed early. Then it wouldn't be so long before it was morning again, and he'd get to know more about Elizabeth Hansen and the angel Ethereal. When he woke up on the 12th of December, Mama and Papa were in his room before he managed to open his eyes. That was a bit special because it was Saturday, when Joachim was usually up long before the others. "You must open the calendar," said Papa. "Hurry up." It was obvious that he would have liked to open it himself. The picture was of a man in a red tunic holding a large sign. Mama and Papa sat on the bed. Joachim had picked up a little piece of paper. Folded over and over, he smoothed it out, reading aloud what was written on the paper in very tiny writing. Quirinius. The 5 sheep had crossed a ridge and begun to run down into fertile agricultural district. Imperial fluttered around the little flock, and after the sheep and the cherub came Jacob and Joshua, Caspar and Balthazar, Ethereal and Elizabeth. They passed Lake Bile and then several more lakes. The biggest and the most beautiful was Lake Geneva. It glittered so that it looked as if it was a piece of heaven that had fallen down to earth. Only when Elizabeth looked up and saw that there was no hole in the sky was she able to be quite sure that the picture of the sky and the big lake was only a reflection. Again, they ran along an old road alongside a river in a deep valley. Ethereal told them that the river was called the Rhone, and that all the water it carried with it from the Alps ran down, first to Lake Geneva, and then later right down to the Mediterranean. They ran across an old bridge to the other side of the river and stopped in front of the monastery called St. Maurice. There were high Alps on every side with snow on their peaks. The time is 1079 after Christ, said Ethereal. The monks have lived here among these tall mountains, praising God and his creation ever since the 17th century. The 7th century. The monastery is built around the grave of the Holy St. Maurice, who was killed here in the valley in the year 285 because he refused to worship the Roman gods. He had only just finished speaking when a monk walked out of the monastery. He greeted them with a slight nod. "Gloria Dei," he said. "And the same to you," said Elizabeth, even though she had not understood what the monk was saying. She thought one of them ought to answer him. Only then did the monk notice the two angels. He knelt on the grass and said, "Hallelujah, hallelujah." It was clear that they weren't used to angels visiting them at the monastery, even though it was so high up in the Alps that it was close to the angels in heaven. Imperial rose above the ground, flew toward the monk, gently beating his wings, and said in a soft voice, as soft as silk, "Fear not, and be in no wise afraid. We are only going to Bethlehem to greet the Christ child." Then King Caspar of Nubia strode up to the monk. He said, "Peace be with you and your monastery. It is true what the angel has said. We are on our way to the Holy Land to pay homage to the King of Kings in Bethlehem, the city of David." With those words, they set off again. They came to a little place called Martigny, where there was an old Roman theatre. "The Romans used this route over the Alps too," explained the angel ethereal. "Much later, Napoleon crossed the Alps with his army." "To Bethlehem," called Joshua, and they sped upwards toward the high mountains. The air was so thin and clear that Elizabeth thought she must be on her way to heaven. From time to time they saw a mountain hare, a marmot, or an alpine goat. Up in the air circled crows and vultures, and now and again a grouse started up from the bushes. At the top of the mountain pass stood a large house. "The time is 1045 years after Christ," said the angel ethereal. "That house is a hospice whose purpose is to look after people who are crossing the Alps. It's brand new and has been built by Bernard of Menton. From now on, and for the rest of time, the Benedictine monks will live up here and organise a rescue service for people who are lost in the mountains. They are helped by their clever St. Bernard dogs." "Right," said the cherub imperial, "for Jesus wanted to teach humans to help one another when they were in distress. Once he told a story about a man who was on his way from Jerusalem to Jericho and was attacked by robbers who left him half dead at the side of the road. Several priests passed by, but none of them bent down to help the poor man, though he was in danger of losing his life. Jesus thought that there wasn't much point in being priests if they couldn't be bothered to help out a fellow human being in distress. They might just as well forget all their prayers." Elizabeth nodded, and Imperial continued, "But then a Samaritan came past, and Samaritans are not very popular in Judea because their religion was a bit different from that of the Jews. But the Samaritan had compassion on him and helped the unfortunate man, so he saved his life." "Yes, indeed, for there's no sense in believing what's right unless it leads to helping people in distress." Elizabeth nodded again and hid the cherub's words in her heart. At one point where the pass forked, a man was standing with a large sign in his hand. He was wearing a long red tunic. If he had not moved, one might have thought he was a petrified Roman from the Roman Empire. On the sign was written, "To Bethlehem," in capital letters. An arrow had been drawn in as well to show which path they should follow. "A living road sign," exclaimed Elizabeth. Ethereal nodded. "Verily I say unto you, that road sign must be one of us." Imperial was so excited that he flew right up to the man and shouted at him, "Fear not, fear not, fear not!" But the man, with a sigh, was not at all affrighted. He took a step toward Elizabeth, offered her his hand, and said, No, that wasn't quite correct. I mean, at your service, my friends." The very first thing I must remember to do is to say my name, because I too have been allowed to take part in this Advent calendar. My name is Quirinius, governor of Syria. Attractive appearance, close acquaintance desired. Well, the most important thing, of course, to be good and kind. Elizabeth couldn't help laughing. He talked so oddly. It was as if there were two people talking at once, for he interrupted himself the whole time. He handed her the sign. He had perhaps been standing and holding it for an eternity with the wind flapping in his tunic. He said, "And this, I am asking for your attention, my friends, for here I have the actual prize. I ought to say that this prize is for you." "Am I to have the sign?" said Elizabeth in astonishment, and Quirinius replied, "Only on the one side. I mean, you must turn it round. Do you understand?" Elizabeth didn't understand why he said this all the time, for there was no dog or cat anywhere near, but the angel Ethereal whispered that Dixie was Latin and meant that he'd finished speaking. Elizabeth turned the sign round and saw, to her great surprise, what she was holding in her hand was an Advent calendar with 24 doors to be opened. Above each door was painted a picture of a young woman with fair hair. She was standing in front of a church with a dome on top. "The first 12, said Quirinius. "You may first open the first 12 doors, for we come exactly so far on our journey, Dixie." Elizabeth sat down on a rock and opened the first door. Behind it was a picture of a lamb. Behind the next door was an angel, and behind the third a sheep. Then there followed pictures of a shepherd, another sheep, a king of Orient, a sheep, a shepherd, a sheep, a cherub, and another king of the Orient. Elizabeth saw that they were pictures of everyone who had joined the pilgrimage on its long way through Europe. But who was the lady? "Thank you very much," she said. Quirinius shook his head. "On the contrary, what you said last was quite wrong, because you're not the one to say thank you. I am. I thank you and others here for allowing an old Roman like myself to join this godly group, which is on the right way to Bethlehem after all. It was not I, in fact, it was you who set off first after this delightful lamb. Dixie, Dixie, Dixie." Elizabeth looked up at Ethereal and laughed. "But you haven't opened the 12th door," said the angel. Elizabeth opened the 12th door as well, and now she was looking down at a tiny picture of a fair-haired woman in front of the big dome of a church. Joshua struck his shepherd's crook against the cairn. "To Bethlehem, to Bethlehem." "How far is it to Bethlehem now?" asked Elizabeth. "Not very far," said Ethereal. That's the end of the chapter.